Hello, my name is Bernard Lamborel, and I'm the author of The Covenant on the Origin of the Abrahamic Faith by Means of Deification. It's a historical essay in which I argue that Abraham did exist, but made a covenant with a Mesopotamian king and not a god. In this last video of a series, I will try to kind of wrap up by explaining how the idea of a secular covenant better explains and offers a more parsimonious explanation for the origin of the faith, as well as explain its evolution. So first of all, we know that there's always been, not always, but there's been kingdoms of Israel in north, with Samaria with its capital, and kingdom of Judah in the south, with Jerusalem being the capital. And there's always been fight between these two kingdoms before their unification. Now the red dot is the city of Shechem, and this is where we find the temple of Baal-berith, and this is where I believe it all started. And as you can see, it's in the kingdom of Israel. Now the Samaritans are a group of people that live and originates from Shechem and Mount Gerizim and the other mount there. They're basically still living near the temple of Baal-berith in Nablus, and these are the ruins, what's left of this temple. And so these Samaritans, which were about 1 million people at the height of their population, are now only a few hundred individuals. They claim that they are the original keeper of the law and that the Jews inherited their belief after the exile. So they claim they are the original keeper. Now, archaeological digs have found some vestiges of Hyksos at the Tel Belada, which is the temple of Baal-berith. Now we know that the tradition claims that Joseph was buried in Shechem, and Jacob's well can be found in Shechem, and that Shechem was a city of Levitical priesthood. We talk about that. Now, the Jewish tradition disagrees. They believe that the Samaritans are Assyrian captives and idolater who have learned about Yahweh. Idolater who have learned about Yahweh. Now, from the perspective of Jewish perspective, who returned from Babylon with new ideas and a renewed sense of spirituality towards Yahweh, a bunch of people worshipping Baal-berith and Asherah would certainly be considered idolaters. DNA tests, even though the Jews claim that Samaritans are not authentic, DNA tests show that they are. They share the same DNA structure. In the book of Judges, we see that King Abimelech burned 1,000 Israelites that had found refuge in the temple of Baal-berith. Now, why would they have found refuge there? Obviously because they worshipped, and Abimelech was likely not a fan. Joshua, as we talked earlier, renewed the covenant, or was basically next to the Ark of Covenant, read the word of the law in Shechem as well. So clearly Shechem and the Samaritans have a connection. Now, why, if the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, so if the Torah were all myth and were a late composition, how do you explain the Samaritans? the Samaritans are believed to have been there since the 8th century before the Common Era, somewhere around 750. I don't remember the exact dates. But people that claim that the Bible, or the scholars that claim that the Bible was written and the story of Abraham and all that were written after, how do they explain the Samaritans? And how do they explain if these stories are the only bits that are mythical stories on the Bible, well, not the only ones, but are clearly mythical? How can they explain that these late stories would have all of a sudden become the essence of these Samaritan people? It just makes no sense. What makes sense is that these Samaritans are right when they claim that they are the original keeper of the covenant, and the Jewish are right when they say they were idolater who have come to learn about Yahweh after the exile. So they're both right. So layers upon layers, the Bible has evolved and transformed. Started out with a covenant between two men, Abraham and his Lord. At the time when the cult of the ancestor was popular. Now, inject some nomadic lifestyle with the cult of the ancestor and this unique covenant, and you get Baal Berith or El Berith, and the evolution into a god-like being worshipped as godlike, and with the sedentarization. So by inheriting the land, these nomadic people become sedentary, and sedentary people worshipped a local god, and their local god was basically the deified memory of this benevolent lawgiver that was King Hammurabi. Now, under Egyptian domination, who were fond of compounded deities, these Baal and Asherah became, as suggested, Baal Yah wa Baala, which is basically the full name of Yahweh, a compounded deity that contains both the characteristics of Baal Berith and Asherah. Baal Berith being the progenitor or the father of Isaac, and Sarah being the mother of Isaac, and together forming this couple, divine couple, that was deified and that continued to represent the basically the divine assembly. Now, out of that, the Samaritans were kind of ejected, and the sole focus was on Yahweh and Elohim. So the Baals were, the Samaritan were not necessarily ejected, but perhaps the ones that were burnt in the tower were, because we were trying to basically reinforce the worshiping of Yahweh and Elohim, and that happened during the Amorite dynasty when it was overthrown by King Jehu, and eventually after the Babylonian exile, what was left was a reintegration of this story into a concept of monotheism, and again, probably some influence from Zoroastrianism and so on. So there you have it, a perfect evolution from the cult of the ancestor to today's scholarly consensus. Now, that was the evolution. In conclusion, what I'd like to do is kind of reconsider the original arguments that scholars are using today to conclude to a mythical story by looking at the mythical nature of the text. So first, interactions with gods, theophany, are likely, unlikely. Indeed, that is true as long as you believe it's theophany. But if you believe there was a secular covenant, as we try to demonstrate, then this argument doesn't hold anymore. Many gods in antiquity exhibited anthropomorphic trait. That is also true, but this doesn't prevent Yahweh from being immortal and having a secular covenant. And again, as argued with the evidence of the text, we can show that he was truly human. Monotheism is a concept that did not exist during Bronze Age. That's true, but again, there was no monotheism, and we don't claim there was monotheism. Quite the contrary, we believe that a secular covenant gave rise to a new God that initially was just part of polytheist worship with Sarah, and monotheism is a very late creation. Gods were witnesses, not party, to territorial covenant. So once again, there's no God part of the covenant here. If anything, El, which was the local god, might have been a party, a witness to the treaty. Writing was specialized and expensive, state affair. We're definitely dealing here with an important state affair. I mean, the inheritance of a critical piece of land that was basically this trade corridor between Mesopotamia and Egypt. So definitely a state affair. Understood as a sophisticated collection of ancient literature. Again, this is true for the myth of the creation, the myth of the flood, even Babel, but not for Abraham. The story of Abraham has no parallel in ancient literature. Textual criticism point to a late composition. Well, this one is true. Now, if you take King James Bible that was translated or written a few hundred years ago, and you take a modern Bible, the wording is different. It's the same story. So I believe as people translated, or not translated, but recopied the text, they also adjusted for the current usage of the words, and this would explain why it looks like we have a more recent text or wording. Another option is that the text was originally written in Akkadian and was only translated in Hebrew at a later time. We've addressed the unrealistic ages of the patriarchs with the sextant multiplier and the sexagesimal conversion, failed conversion. And same thing for the chronologies that do not match any of the known historical events. So every one of the main arguments that are being put forth by scholars to refute the idea that the story of Abraham has some historicity can be refuted. And obviously, more work needs to be done to confirm this and be peer-reviewed and whatnot. But I believe we've got a good start. More importantly, I think we've got a very efficient synthesis that enables us to solve the dialectic that has taken place between minimalists and maximalists. I think both of them were right and were wrong at the same time. So I believe both of them were right and wrong at the same time. So if we look at the claims from maximalist and minimalist, they're both looking at it as a religious text or religious covenant. So maximalists have it right when they say it's a historical event. They have it right when they say it started in the Bronze Age. However, they have it wrong when they claim theophany took place, and they have it wrong when they claim Baal was not Yahweh and was actually the demon. Minimalists have it wrong when they claim it's just a mythical event that has no ground hidden historicity. They have it wrong when they claim it's a late creation, or a late composition, I should say, dating from the Persian period. I'm basically arguing in the book that this story could not have been passed down orally the way it is today. And we can show that it would have been impossible to pass this story down orally. So it must have been written down during the Bronze Age. But they have it right when they claim that there was no monotheism during the Bronze Age, and people were practicing the cult of the dead, and that Baal basically evolved and became known as Yahweh. So the secular solution that I'm proposing, which is essentially a secular interpretation of the story of Abraham, provides solution on both sides and kind of bridges the gap by confirming that it was a historical event that took place during the Bronze Age. There was no monotheism, but it evolved from the cult of the dead, and it does confirm that Baal became Yahweh, and explain how that happened. So again, unlike arguing that God does not exist, which at the end has little or no impact on one's belief, I've been trying to use objective facts to show that the God of the Bible likely originates from the deification of a powerful man. The belief in God's covenant remain a source of major conflicts. We just need to look at the world today and what's going on, and it's very easy to see how that is the case. It's also clear that historical confusion has allowed fundamentalists to hold their claims. The fact that the God of the Bible cannot be denied has allowed them to continue claiming that it is true. Now, I believe that we have knowledge, and this is just the beginning, hopefully, of more research. But hopefully this knowledge will allow us to fight homophobia and sectarian beliefs. The Sodomites, when they sodomized these people, if God destroyed them, it's not because they were homosexuals. It's just because they didn't want to submit to his power. And these people wanted freedom. That's all they wanted. There's never been a problem with homosexuality, but the way priests have read the story down the road have brought them to condemn homosexuality, because that's all they could read in that story. So if we can bring people to realize that God never condemned homosexuality in that story, and that Sodom, the terrible visuals we get for Sodom and Gomorrah, had nothing to do. Those people were just fighting for freedom. They're just freedom fighters. Hopefully it can change our outlook on religions and on how religious people see LGBTQ people. So I believe we have a moral obligation to challenge what I refer to as academic complacence. It is time to challenge that and reverse the vapor, and bring them to consider this work. And I'm definitely not claiming there's no mistake. It's got to be full of mistakes, full of imperfections, I would say, maybe more than mistakes. But I can't just do all this work by myself. I got to have some scholars to be willing to look into it and evaluate it at face value. And that's what it's worth. Not just come in and say, oh, this doesn't make any sense. No. Look at the evidence, reconsider what you know, reconsider, change, adopt a new perspective. And hopefully together we can all be friends of the earthly covenant, because at the end of the day, we need more love, not more fighting and division. And I thank you for watching, and I hope you're going to reshare and we can make some progress with this.